Hey guys, welcome to episode 4 of Real Squawk. Today I am joined with Dr. Jason Crean and Lisa Bolstad. Jordan is sadly not here today, but today we're going to continue the discussion on nutrition since March was the month of nutrition and it's the last day of March. So we figured we'd go ahead and carry on and kind of address some of the questions that came up on our last video that you guys asked us about. So there was a lot of questions about the specifics of sprouting, how we manage our time, how we actually go about making the raw food mash and chops. And then we wanted to kind of talk about, different aspects as well, such as growing microgreens and how you can plant and grow edible flowers and herbs for your birds. So with sprouting, I think the biggest thing that we wanted to kind of mention was that it only takes minutes a day. So, and even if you wanted to start small, you could always just soak some of these mixes and serve them. You've soaked them overnight. They don't require them to be sprouted. Some of them do, but the one on the right here is the Tops All-in-One. You can simply just soak that for 8 to 10 hours and then sprout. The one on the left is the China Prairie Microgreen blend. So that one actually does need to be sprouted. But so we were kind of going to take you through the steps of how we sprout, or this is specifically how I sprout. So I use the Easy Sprout system, which is pictured on the right. This is a bundle that I usually give to anyone who purchases a baby from me. It contains an Easy Sprouter, some samples of the sprout blends, and then one of the China Prairie whole food supplements, such as the Nourish. Slide. So for the step 1, obviously you would soak. You want to use some kind of antimicrobial in this. I use the grapeseed extract, which is called the Fresh Stabilizer. That is also available through China Prairie. You can use a mason jar. I used to use mason jars exclusively before I discovered the Easy Sprouter. And the first time I used it, I remember thinking to myself, this is life-changing. I'm never using a mason jar again. It makes it so easy. And so the first step obviously is to soak whatever it is that you're sprouting or soaking 8 to 10 hours. Usually the way that I do this is I set it up so that everything is going to be done when I do my my actual chopping and my preparation on Sundays. So I'll usually set my stuff up to soak Friday night. That way, Saturday morning and throughout the day, I'm home, I'm rinsing everything, and it's ready by the time I need it on Sunday. So 8 to 10 hours, soaked shelled tree nuts and other items like grains can be served immediately after the overnight soak. For the size of the Easy Sprout, I think it's 7 or 8 drops, right, Jason, of the is what I use. Mm-hmm. And then you just fill it up and you let it soak. You just sit it. So it's that portion of it, the pouring of whatever it is that you're soaking into whatever it is you're soaking in and filling with water. I cannot even imagine it takes me more than a minute to do in a night.
Yeah, and I just want to go back real quick, just to clarify, there is a reason why the picture on the left has to be soaked and sprouted versus the picture on the right that only needs to be soaked but can also be sprouted. And if you didn't catch what I just said, just rewind and play again. The picture on the left has legumes like beans, and there's only a few that you can actually safely soak and sprout. Mung are the green beans that are in there, and those have to be soaked and sprouted, okay? But most of the grains and seeds, you can only soak them. It's very easy to just soak them overnight, rinse them in the morning, feed them to your birds. You've already improved the nutritional value of those items. But when it comes to things like mung beans, adzuki beans, garbanzo beans, those are the 3 beans that you can safely soak and sprout. Those have to be soaked and sprouted, okay? So I just wanted to make sure that we were clear on that, because there is a reason why you can soak certain things. The other thing is mason jar. This has a solid lid, but you would need a mesh top for that, and they do sell those. I know you can get those on Amazon, but the seeds need to breathe. You definitely need to make sure that they're breathing. And the reason that Tiffany said, one of the reasons that Tiffany said the Easy Sprout, and we'll show you what that looks like in a minute, is life-changing is because it not only breathes from the top, but also from the bottom. So there's a mesh on either side, and it really makes sprouting incredibly simple, super fast. I find stuff soaks twice as fast in the Easy Sprouter than it does when I was using mason jars. And it's just so easy to keep everything clean and safe. Oh, and antimicrobial. So you brought up the fresh stabilizer that China Prairie has, which is what you're holding there with your well manicured fingers. You can also use like food grade hydrogen peroxide. I know people swear by, and things like that. You know, you just want to make sure that you are rinsing every a good solid 8 hours at least. You know, 2 to 3 times a day. Just keeping, you know, those sprouts rinsed. I know there's people who use no antimicrobial and have no problems and never have because they are rinsing, you know, regularly. But, you know, I tend to always use some kind of antimicrobial like the grapefruit seed extract or the food grade hydrogen peroxide as a precaution.
I think I might have said grape seed extract. So yeah, grapefruit seed extract.
Yeah, grapefruit seed extract is what you want. It's very different.
So then for the second step, rinsing and draining thoroughly every 8 hours or so for about 24 to 36 hours. It usually goes a little bit faster for me based on when I like to serve them. So I would say for me, I lean on the 24-hour side of the preference, but I know other people who let it go a little bit longer than that. I also rinse mine more frequently just because when I'm doing it, I'm home. So I don't, you know, I'm sure it's not super, doesn't make much of a difference either way, but I tend to rinse mine probably every 4 to 5 hours when I'm home on the Saturday. And then the other thing I wanted to note is that when you're talking about sprouting, we're not talking about what people think when they think of like alfalfa sprouts. I think this notion gets into people's head. They're visualizing these alfalfa sprouts, these broccoli sprouts that you can buy at the grocery store. That's not the same thing. So what you're looking for is called a chit. You didn't mishear me. Chit, CH, not SH. So the chit is when the seed basically just begins to break open and put out that little seed tail. And the reason why, and Jason can probably articulate this way better than me, is that the more that the seed produces that root growth, that shoot, the less nutritious it becomes because it's putting all of its energy into producing that shoot versus the energy is still kind of packed into the actual seed. But you could probably explain that better than me.
Yeah, but I mean, biologically speaking, what we're trying to do is capitalize on a natural process. All seeds and like nuts are a seed, and legumes are theoretically a seed. All of those, when they're dry, have energy storage that's just sitting there waiting to be used when conditions are right for growing. And usually that means moisture, right? Water. So you add water to these things, it stimulates them to start converting that stored energy into something more useful so that they can start growing their own leaves. And then once they have their own leaves, photosynthesis takes over and they can kind of create their own energy. So we're trying to capture that process, which is a very narrow window. So as soon as you start to see a root tail, you go for it. You're done. It's very easy.
Can you go back a couple slides?
Yeah.
Because I think that's a perfect example. So that tops mix on the right, to me, that's perfect, like perfect time. I'm trying to lean in so I can see, but you can see how they just barely have that break where that root tip is starting to come out, or that sprout tail is starting to come out.
Right. And so these, you know, the ones on the right have a very little tiny, you know, root tail. The ones on the left, you can see a root tail in some of those, like sunflower seed and mung beans, a little bit more pronounced. But the idea here is that we're trying to capture that narrow window of nutrition. Now, sprouting versus microgreens. Microgreens is where these things will continue to grow, and will develop their own leaves, which then have a whole other set of nutrients. So by doing both, you're giving your birds that much more. And that's really important. And we'll talk about microgreens in a bit.
So then we have a little video here to where you can see kind of just how easy it is to rinse and why the Easy Sprout is amazing.
So the lid is domed so that air basically gets pulled up and out. And you can see the mesh bottom here makes it really easy to soak and then drain. And then I would rinse this once I'm officially done with, and you can see like, let me go back there. Oops. So right there, almost, right there, this can sit up so that it allows air through underneath as well as from the top. So this is kind of a passive system where air naturally gets pulled out through that raised lid, which then forces air to come up underneath through the mesh. And that means that those sprouts are getting that much more airflow. And that airflow is critical. That's what keeps any mold away. I mean, I've never had a single issue since I've been using the Easy Sprouter. So definitely worth the time and money. You can get it at chinaprairie.com, but just really, really easy to use. And just, you know, the ability to just rinse right in here and then put it back and then rinse again later, put it right back. It's so easy and takes minutes a day. I don't have as well manicured fingers like Tiffany does. Okay.
They're not very well manicured right now.
No.
They're very handsome, Jason.
I'm about 2 weeks late on my manicure.
Okay.
So I was having this step 3 in here is a little bit of like a silly thing, because I wanted to sort of, I guess, poke a little bit fun on how simple this is. I say that there's 3 steps because the 3rd step is just feeding them. So it's a step 1 of soaking, step 2 of rinsing, and step 3 is just feeding them. So it could even be step 1 soak, step 2 feed. It really just depends on what, you know, you feel like you have the time to dedicate to and what you're most comfortable doing. But you can offer the sprouted seed on its own as well. So if you're not comfortable with the idea of, you know, if you feel like you don't have the time to chop up raw vegetables, or maybe you have a really busy weekend and the only thing you have time to do is just sprout some seed, and after that, that's better than doing nothing. I find myself occasionally where, you know, I just haven't had a chance to make it to the grocery store and get something fresh, or I've had stuff. Sometimes I'll buy an entire head of red cabbage, for instance, and then I'll use half of it. And then when I go to use the other half, I'm like, this isn't as fresh as I'd like it to be. So I just wait. And so for maybe that first Monday, I'll just feed sprouted seed. And then that's when I make the chop on like a Monday night. But, you know, one of the questions that we got is how do we kind of manage this, and what would we recommend for someone who works a full-time job? And I think there's maybe this notion that we don't work full-time jobs. I have a full-time day job myself. So not only
I have more than one. I work all the time.
I mean, not only am I caring for, you know, the full aviary, hand feeding babies, I've got 5 dogs, and I have a full-time job, and it's just me, and I'm still managing to do this. So I think that simply identifying what you feel is the challenge and knowing, is it just setting aside that time? You know, maybe you have a family that you're raising, maybe you have young children, and, you know, maybe it's identifying when that right time is to do it. So if you find yourself busy when you come home, you're having to cook dinner for the whole family, and then you're having to put kids to bed or whatever it is, you know, maybe it's something that you do early in the morning. It just really depends on what your life looks like. It's really hard for me to tell someone how to time manage themselves because I don't know, you know, what you have going on in life. I just know me. So I know how I can manage my time. And sometimes I'll be perfectly honest. Sometimes I'm like, I do not feel like it. And those times when I don't feel like it, I tell you, those freeze dried veggie mixes can be a lifesaver for me because my birds love them. So it's nice to have it if I just am like, I really don't feel like going to the grocery store and doing this.
Yeah, and I think that when it comes to time management, obviously like sprouts take a little while. But if you, on a Friday night, you rinse your seeds, you put them in the water, and you leave them overnight, and then Saturday morning, you rinse them off and dip them in whatever liquid, I just put the drops of grapefruit seed extract in some water, and I dip all my sprouts in there and just leave it on them until I rinse again. Mm-hmm. And by Sunday morning, everything's done. So on Sunday, I typically will rinse all my sprouts, put them in with some like dried rolled oats. Rolled oats usually suck up all the excess moisture, or a coconut, or both, the graywoodmanor.com tea blends, all those dried flowers and stuff that soaks up some moisture. And then I put in whatever veggies I have time to chop. So I like bitter greens for the birds, like dandelion greens, which are very easy to get. A little bit of kale, if you have a health food store near you, a lot of them carry microgreens that you don't have to grow yourself. You can just dump them in. But you need to make it easy for you. The key here is that you're feeding diversity no matter what, no matter how far you go. If you're just feeding a sprouting blend, you're already feeding a diverse set of food that is whole, raw, packed with nutrients, antioxidants, things like that you can't get from a dry pellet. You can't get from a processed food. And so, we want to make sure that we're adding things to it that we have accessible: peppers, broccoli, greens. I mean, carrots, carrot tops. Carrot tops are a favorite here. So I'll just take the tops off the carrots, chop them up, and throw them all in there. And then we're going to talk about storage. Here. And I use these religiously for all my fruit, for my fruit eating birds, like my toucans, and for my sprouts or my mash with the sprouts and all the greens and everything. That blue seal keeps everything just as fresh as when I chopped it. My rule of thumb is usually a week at a time I make food, and they snap down on all four sides so that it's all locked in. And I can stick my face in there and smell it on day 7, and it smells just like it did on day 1. So, definitely some very easy ways. And I'm still using some of these like from years ago. I mean, they just last forever. So, it's minutes a day. It's easy once you have the system down, which is not that many steps. Like Tiffany said, it's a breeze.
I think that's important to note too, that I think you should be able to trust your nose on this, because once you've smelled sprouts that have gone sour or mash that is sour, you'll never question whether or not your stuff is fresh, because it is very, very noticeable when it's turned. And then I wanted to mention, because this came up recently in a parrotlet group, that for those of you who wish to lightly steam things, so if you're steaming sweet potato or butternut squash, my personal preference is to keep it separate from anything that's raw and add it the morning of. Because if you put it in with everything that's fresh, especially something like I've seen people who put, boiled egg in their mash, you cannot mix that stuff because it's going to make it go bad. It's going to make it go rancid so fast. So for me, moist fruits. So if I'm giving my birds any type of really moist fruit, I wait to give that until the morning that I'm feeding it. I would not mix that in with the mash or with the sprouted seed. And I would not do anything steamed in with it, because I feel like it's going to cause it to churn and go rancid a little bit faster than if you just leave everything raw. And so for me personally, I don't cook anything. I do sweet potato raw. I do butternut squash raw. I just prefer it that way because I don't want to have 8 different containers in my fridge that I have to pull out. So
anything heated has been compromised, and that means that it's going to go bad much faster. And so there's this myth about like what you just mentioned, Tiffany, with sweet potato and butternut squash. There's this myth out there that like it's toxic and it's going to kill your birds. It's not. The nutrients are more available if you lightly steam it, but you don't have to do that. And if it's a matter of keeping it fresh, so it's not going to spoil while, you know, it's out in a bowl in your bird's cage during the day, you don't need to do that. You absolutely don't need to do that. But cooked food, anything processed, is going to spoil so much faster than any of the fresh food that you put in the bowl. The fresh food can absolutely stay in the bowl while you're at work or school.
I want to bring this up too, because it's interesting to me, because there are a lot of blends that you can purchase where the intent is that you're cooking these things for the birds.
Yes.
So you're having to boil them on the stove. And it's interesting to me because I feel like that is much more labor intensive and much more time consuming to actively be cooking something, to be making blending bird bread and cooking it in the oven and pulling it out of the pan and cutting it up and properly storing it. So it's interesting to me that people seem to think like, oh, this is so easy. I can do this. I can cook this pasta creations for my bird, but I can't put seeds in a plastic easy sprout and leave it for 8 to 10 hours completely unattended. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, and bread, pasta, like those things aren't good for us. I don't know if everybody knows that at home, but those things are not good for us. So they're definitely not good for our birds. Don't love your bird to death. Don't love your bird with food. Give them healthy food. And there's no such thing as moderation when it comes to an unhealthy food. Your birds have little bodies. A little bit of bad food goes a long way with them. So just you don't need to do that. Love your birds with really healthy, vibrant foods like what we've shown you tonight. That's ideal. And I know Lisa has something to say about this.
No, I've been better. And
Yep.
and like Jason, I mean, really like Jason said, I joke about giving them a piece of pizza or something, but I mean, it's a teeny tiny piece and it's very, very, very rarely. And even then, really, they don't need it. I mean, I do it for me. I'm not really doing it for them because I'm a sharer and I want to share my pizza. Yeah. But, you know, it is what would seem like just a tiny bite for you. I mean, even a little smidgen, that's as big as their beak sometimes. Right. So it wouldn't be like just having a piece of cheesecake. It'd be like having a piece of cheesecake that's as big as your entire head.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I see nothing wrong with that.
No, right? And Lisa's right. Like birds naturally have a light body mass because they need to be able to fly in the wild, right? That's why they have a light body mass. That's how they've developed over long periods of time. And so there's a reason why they poop so often, right? It's to drop weight. It's to drop liquid so that they aren't heavy.
Same.
And so giving them a little bit of bad food for us isn't terrible, but for them it can be potentially dangerous. Plus, if they get a taste of that, are they going to want to eat the healthier foods? You know, that's a whole other ball of wax. You know, we see and hear from people all the time, like, oh, I can't get my bird to eat any of this healthy food. Well, what do they have access to? Well, they have pellets in their cage all day. Well, if they have something that they like the taste of because there's added and refined sugars and carbohydrates in it, of course they're not going to, that's junk food. They're not going to want something, right? They're not going to want something healthier. So it's important that, and we're going to talk about how to get your bird eating better in a bit. That is something that you have to consider. You should never starve your bird, but you do need to give them better choices instead of, leaving something in there all the time that they can just choose over everything else.
So, and the other thing too is to just start small. I mean, maybe you only start soaking tree nuts here and there, or maybe you only do a soaked seed and just add that to a little dish and give it to it, try offering that to your birds every day. But I think for me, there's an element of it that's fun for me too. So it's fun for me to see something new that's seasonal that I can add in that, and I'm experimenting with it. And, I think it was like the first time that I saw dragon fruit available, I was like, oh, this is fun. I get to try this. And then I get to taste it too. And it's spoiler alert, it doesn't really taste like much.
But the birds love it.
Yeah, no, it's one of Maven's favorites is the dragon fruit. So, with soaking and sprouting, it takes minutes a day. I've had a lot of people say, oh, I wish I had a house because then I could have a garden. You don't have to have a house to have a garden. You don't have to have a ton of land. You can have a simple, window box like this. I love this little, I want this for myself. I love this little suction cupped microgreen pots on the window here. You really don't have to have a lot of room. You don't have to have a lot of space. You could have a single tiny little pot and you just grow Johnny jump ups, which are little pansies, or some fresh herbs. You could just buy even, a fully started thing of parsley or whatever you are choosing to want to add in, and just plant it. Those do really well inside. They don't even really have to be outside. Basil does very well indoors. Oregano does really well indoors, but just do something small. Just don't try to go all out if you feel like it's going to be overwhelming for you. Just start small and grow from.
Yeah, microgreen. Yeah, go ahead, Lisa.
Oh, even apartments have little balconies off of them usually. I mean, we have deer everywhere in our neighborhood. So unless you have something fenced off, they're going to eat every single thing you grow. So we can use big pots up on our balcony off of our bedroom, or if you have an apartment, off your apartment, and you can grow things in that.
Yeah, and having a brown thumb is not an excuse. It's not an excuse. Anybody can do this. And some of the easiest things that I found are the microgreen kits from trueleafmarket.com. You are literally adding water and walking away. I mean, it's just so incredibly easy. And they give you detailed directions just in case you need them, but very, very simple. You can do them on a windowsill. Within 7 days, you can clip greens and throw them with your bird's food. So there are definitely benefits to growing some of these things, and it's not difficult.
I get this question a lot. So I always have people asking me when they see how much I make, do you freeze it? I do not freeze anything. I think I don't want to say cons and I don't really want to say pros, but I think there's elements to each one that you have to consider. For me, I don't want to have to worry about having to thaw anything. And I also am not, I'm not a fan of the texture that sometimes happens when you freeze things, especially fresh foods, and then thaw them. They tend to get a little bit mushy. They tend, the moisture is a little bit kind of like sucked out of the plant and then redistributed, and it makes it a little bit watery. So some people combat this by adding things like tops pellets or oats, or, you could add something like the teas or herbs or something to kind of soak up that extra liquid. I just prefer to just do everything fresh. As we mentioned earlier, for the most part, the stuff that you would be making, if it's all raw, is going to last between 5 to 7 days in the fridge, no problem. And if you have a smaller, a small bird household, so if you only have one bird, you just don't cut up as much at one time. I've kind of told people in the past, don't buy anything for your bird that you wouldn't be willing to eat yourself. And then that'll help you if you're worried about waste. So, if you only are going to use a quarter of a sweet potato, cut the rest up and roast it and eat it yourself. Or, pick something that you're going to eat too, so that you're not throwing things away or wasting things unnecessarily.
Yeah. If you need to freeze things, that's fine. Freeze them by squeezing out as much air as possible, in Ziploc bags or whatnot. And don't freeze for more than roughly 10 weeks. Beyond 10 weeks, we start to see denaturing of certain vitamins, especially some of the B vitamins. So even though you're freezing it, you're still tending to lose some of that nutrient if you're making too much at one time. But like Tiffany said, once you have a system, especially if you just have one or a few birds, it's incredibly simple to do everything within about 36 hours, starting, soak your stuff, rinse it 12 hours later, and then just rinse a few more times over that next 24-hour period, and you're done. Like, you're ready to go. And like Tiffany said, like, I love to experiment. I love to mix things in. Like, the key here is to keep your birds accustomed to change. You don't want them to get the same thing all the time, because then they'll sit and wait for that favorite thing. And so it's really important that we're diversifying, we're adding different things here and there, so that they are accustomed to change over time.
And pro tip too, depending on the grocery store where you're at, I know for me at Publix, if I'm not wanting to purchase a big head of red cabbage, for instance, if I know I'm going out of town, I'm only making a small amount, you can ask them, hey, can you cut this into a quarter for me? Can I get a quarter of this? And they'll cut it and wrap it and everything for you. If they only have a package that has 4 ears of corn in it or something, or like 20 Brussels sprouts and you only want 4, you can ask them like, hey, can I get a package that just has like a third of a pound or a quarter of a pound of this instead of a full pound? And they'll break that packaging up for you. So that's one thing that I've had people mention to me, is that I can only buy this in these huge quantities, and then, I'm not able to use it. Farmers markets are another option. So if you go to a farmer's market, you can usually get smaller amounts of fresh produce too. So you could usually buy like a smaller bunch of carrots, and maybe have access to a little bit more variety than you would at a typical grocery store too.
Yep. It's all possible.
So with the chops and the mash, I have several people that kind of ask me for recipes, and I don't use a recipe. I have some staples that I stick to. So I almost always have red pepper, carrot, broccoli, but from there, it just depends on what looks good. So sometimes rainbow chard looks really good. Sometimes the dinosaur kale looks really good. Sometimes I get parsley. Sometimes I do oregano. Sometimes I do green beans. Sometimes I do snap peas. It really just depends on what looks good. And I try to shoot for a rainbow of colors. This is maybe not the best illustration, because usually I do have something like beet or radish or red cabbage to kind of break up all the green, but you want it to be diverse. So you want it to be a bunch of different things. And so it's different every time. I don't think I've ever made a chop that looks the same every single time I make it. It all looks different. And find what works for you and what works for your birds. Some people, we talked about this in the last episode. Some people prefer to throw everything into a food processor. I prefer to hand chop most of the stuff. I usually use the food processor for the things like the carrot and the broccoli, just to save time. But, and I also chop mine a little bit smaller because I'm feeding smaller birds. You could put, for a larger bird, you don't have to cut up a snap pea or a green bean. You can put the whole thing in there. So just remember and think about what you're feeding. And it might even be that to get your bird to try a snap pea, maybe they want to see it in a bite-sized piece first, and then maybe they will enjoy it. Aspen used to love to eat just the peas out of them and then would throw the shell away. So it just depends on the bird.
And it's not necessarily size either. I mean, sometimes my budgies will eat bigger chunks of things, I've noticed, than my green wing will. So especially like with greens, they really like chewing on the big pieces of like kale and stuff.
I've noticed that, interestingly, with the Sierras. I don't know if you have, they seem to love to hold on to things and manipulate them with their little feet. It's so cute.
Yeah, Sierra parakeets, and they're one of those that like those bitter greens, like dandelion greens. And you just hang some through the bars and they're gone. I mean, they just annihilate them. So Sometimes those bigger pieces are more fun for them, and really you get to see some of those more naturalistic foraging behaviors as a result.
So then I kind of wanted to highlight the microgreens here. I feel like it's very minimal effort and they can easily be grown indoors. Like Jason said earlier, you can buy these kits from True Leaf Market. These are actually photos from their website. And I rinse mine usually before I serve them, but I'm sure you don't have to. You probably don't, do you?
I usually rinse them just to rinse any dirt, soil,
yeah.
anything like that off, But
yeah, they sell these easy trays and they have ones you can get that don't have the drain holes. They have some you can get with drain holes. So this bottom one is actually one of the larger trays, and then they've got the growing trays set inside of it. And I feel like it's very affordable. Everything that they sell is very affordable. I would not call any of it expensive. And for what you get, I mean, if you're buying just the seeds, you'll get a whole package of seeds. It's going to last. Mm-hmm. I still have mine. I'm not even through all the ones that I ordered.
Yeah. Yeah, and they even have a hydroponic system, which is literally just a tray with like this white fiber mat that you get wet, and you spread the seeds on it, and they grow right on that fiber mat. And you can literally just cut a piece out of that and give it to your bird and let them forage with it. So there's a lot of different ways to do it, but microgreens at this stage, like in this bottom picture here, those are more nutritious than the adult version. So kale microgreens are more nutritious than the adult kale. Does that mean you shouldn't feed adult kale? You should if you can, because there's a lot more fiber in it and some other things, but you get more bang for your buck with these little microgreens.
Plus, they're really fun to grow, honestly.
They're really good too. The mustard and the radish ones are really good.
There's some really spicy ones. That
yes.
Yeah. And all the different colors mean that they have different antioxidants, different polyphenols, bioflavonoids, things like that are all going to bring their own benefit.
Yeah, I wish I had amaranth in there because amaranth is so pretty when
it's pink. Yeah, it's very, very brightly colored. And then I know we had a question about teas. All the pictures on the right are what birds drink from. These are rain catches. And all of them, as you can see, have plant components in there that are leaching all kinds of compounds. And like we talked about last time, many professional institutions have been brewing and offering tea to a host of different animals of all kinds in zoos and things like that for decades, because they bring with them benefits. And so if you're brewing the teas, and if you're in the US, graywoodmanor.com is where I formulated the teas for. And then there's a bunch of different ones in Europe and some other places as well. But the teas that you get have different components that have different benefits. You can read about these on their websites, but brewing is going to be the same, usually 3 to 5 minutes. If you're brewing in hot water, I cold brew because I don't like to heat things. So I will put a handful of the teas in a pitcher of filtered water, and then I'll leave it overnight, either on a counter, just in room temperature, or in the refrigerator. And then by the next day, I've got tea. And I can strain off the solids and actually the flowers and the tea leaves and things like that, and mix it in with my chop and my mash or whatever with the sprouts, and let the birds eat it. And then I've got a pitcher of tea that I can keep in the refrigerator and use over the course of a week. So brewing is really, really important. Don't let anybody tell you that feeding the tea components dry will give you the same benefit, because they won't. You definitely need to be brewing, because we're releasing these plant components are releasing compounds into the water, and diluting them makes them safer. So, I know there's people who are alarmist and they'll say, oh, but I heard this is dangerous, and I heard too much of this is dangerous. None of these teas that are made for birds are going to have those side effects. You're brewing them in carefully formulated blends They're not just a bunch of stuff thrown into a bag. That's not how these avian tea, animal teas in general works. But they're blended together in certain quantities so that your birds are getting the best of whatever's in there.
And obviously the teas have the directions on the packaging, correct?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because I know some people had reached out to me and said they were intimidated about, I don't know, how much to do per water. And I'm thinking to myself, it's on the package. Just follow.
Yes, it's on the package. Yes, please follow. Yeah, follow. Definitely, invest in a couple different blends. See how they go. Worst case scenario, you take them dry and you add them to your sprouts and veggies and mix them all together. Then you've got, they've got flower petals to eat and things like that. But really the major benefit is brewing. And if you haven't looked at the research, there's decades of research on the teas and what benefit they bring, what the active compounds are, the organic compounds in all the different tea components. Like aniseed pods down here in this picture on the left. Aniseed pods, not the seed, but the pod itself has shikimic acid, and they use that's the active ingredient in Tamiflu. So, we've isolated some of these compounds that have come from these natural sources to do good for us and increase our wellness. And of course, we always get this, right? How do I get my birds to eat this? We know some of you have stubborn birds. It's not cute to have a stubborn bird. We want to get them, eating better. And any bird will eat anything that you want it to, with persistence and a change in behavior on your part. And so don't offer things a couple of times and say, well, that's it, they won't eat it. You need to experiment and try different things. The pictures here of the Pioneus at the top with the sprouts and greens in the little half pumpkin. This bird loved pumpkin, raw pumpkin. So why not throw its daily amount of food in the pumpkin and get it trying new things? And that was a big win. These different foraging devices, I think we said last time, like a stainless steel skewer will last the lifetime of your bird, and you can use it for just all kinds of things. So definitely invest in a stainless steel skewer. And, offering chopped items like the picture at the bottom left, all these little pieces, it makes it really difficult for a bird not to sample something that it hasn't already sampled, right? So they associate non-food items they don't think are food, with food items. And so that sometimes chopping it small, and I mean, I've gotten macaws eating better with this finely chopped food. So you just never know. And then, we've got little birds that like the big whole food that's on the skewer over there. So you have to experiment. You have to think about what's their natural behavior. Do my birds come from the Amazon where they're hanging from a tree, trying to grab stuff from the end of a branch? Are they grazers like cockatiels and budgies who like to scurry around the ground and forage through and look for favorite, little greens and seeds and stuff like that? But it all comes down to portion size. And so portion size has to be taken seriously. We are not starving the birds, but we're limiting how much food they have so that they're more apt to try other things, to take advantage of the diversity that you're trying to offer.
Yeah, and I want to point out here too that, oh my God, I just completely lost my train of thought. Oh, so with the portion sizing, we've had a lot of time recommend that people pull the dry seed out of the cage at night, and that way in the morning they're only getting the raw food. And I have
or whatever dry food, any dry food.
Yeah. And I have people just panicking that their bird is going to starve. And if your bird has access to food, it's not going to starve. If your bird has access to its favorite food 24/7, there's no incentive for it to ever try anything different.
Right.
I make this analogy all the time. It's like putting a Happy Meal in front of a child and a plate of broccoli, and then being shocked that the child goes for the Happy Meal every single time. It's obvious. It should be a no-brainer. You know, if you're offering these dry seeds, if you have a plate of sunflower seeds out all the time, there's no incentive for there to be any tasting of anything. And I think people panic too quickly and think, my bird is going to starve. I have to give them this dry seed. They're not eating it. They're not eating it. And the bird sees this behavior and knows, I just don't have to eat it for an hour and she's going to give me what I like.
They have us trained.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
To be weighing your bird every single day to make sure. I mean,
and they will convert. I mean, I had a Patagonian conure come to me that was 26 years old, and all he had ever eaten were sunflower seeds and frozen corn. That was it. And it took, I know, it took a little, and part of the reason that he is because his owner thought he was going to starve it when she tried to offer him other things, and he wouldn't eat them right away. And it took him a little longer than some birds. It took, I don't know, 4 or 5 weeks, you know, gradually adding stuff in, but he eats everything my birds eat now. Sometimes it helps when they see other birds eating stuff. You know, he saw the other birds eating it, so he ate it too. But I have never once, ever, with any bird, not been able to convert it onto a fresh diet.
And if you have a good relationship with your bird or birds, offering them food by hand, like when I'm weaning babies, for example, who are completely dependent upon me, especially baby toucans, because they're just monsters. They're just dragons when it comes to food. But, you know, I get those small disposable plates that I can just rinse and recycle, and I will put the food on the plate and just put it in front of them and shovel it towards them so they see it moving. And often that's enough for them to start sampling things. And so, you know, you just got to experiment. But if you have a good relationship with your bird and you're offering things by hand, they're probably going to be more apt to try them. So keep that in mind.
Yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, you're fine. I put weaning on raw whole foods on here too, because I wanted to emphasize the importance of if you don't own a bird yet and you're looking to purchase a bird and you're not going the rescue route and you're going with the breeder, try to look for a breeder that you know is going to wean the babies appropriately onto a diet that consists of raw whole foods and not just wean it onto millet, which I say all the time, I feel is a lazy crutch. I see this all the time with people relying on millet spray to wean babies. And then what do? You get a baby that only eats millet spray.
Or just pellets. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, they need to be abundance weaned. They need to see and associate all these different types of things as food. So definitely, you know, and even if your breeder doesn't do that normally, talk to them about offering some food so that they can wean your bird onto something, because if you can wean them onto a diverse diet, that's the easiest way, to make sure that they're getting used to change, and that will really, I think, produce a bird that has much better neural development, brain development, because they're foraging and manipulating many different types of foods, which is just going to help them, you know, better develop their nervous system as they grow. So that was all the questions that we got regarding food. We want to hear from you, so please let us know if you have other ideas, other topics, other questions, and we will respond to those in upcoming episodes.
I did want to note, I did see some other questions, but because they weren't related to nutrition, I just wanted to let everyone know. We did see it. We do hear you. We are going to cover that stuff, but we wanted to focus specifically on for this one. So if you asked a question that wasn't directly related, don't fret. We are going to talk about it, just not in this episode.
Yep. So I'm Jason, and I'm joined with Tiffany and Lisa, and we really appreciate you being here and listening to what we have to say. So we will squawk at you later.
Bye.